Felicia Morgan stood behind the counter, her fingers absently wiping down the already clean surface of the coffee shop bar. It was late, later than usual, and the last of the evening rush had filtered out, leaving only a few stragglers scattered about, whispering over steaming cups of overpriced lattes. A soft jazz playlist hummed in the background, blending with the steady hiss of the espresso machine, the clink of porcelain, and the faint murmur of conversation. Her eyes wandered to the small table near the window where a couple sat. The woman, a vision in soft pink, had her hand resting on the table, palm up, showing off a sparkling diamond ring. Her fingers traced the edges of it absent-mindedly, while her fiancé, a clean-cut man in a tailored suit, smiled at her with a look that could melt the coldest of hearts. He took her hand and kissed it gently, and Felicia felt the faintest twinge of envy deep in her chest. Not that she wanted what they had, not exactly, but what they had, it was something. It was real. She glanced down at her own phone on the counter. No new messages, no notifications, nothing. Her finger hovered over the screen, but she didn't bother unlocking it. There was nothing there for her. Not tonight. Not any night. The soft laughter from the couple beside her felt louder than it should have, and she forced her gaze to the counter again. The muted reflection of herself in the polished wood was enough to keep her rooted in place. Her tired face, the dark circles beneath her eyes, the inch of graying hair peeking from beneath her black scarf. This isn't who I should be, she thought. Not at 34. A slow, steady breath in and then out. She was a woman far removed from those joyful milestones. There were no engagements, no house keys, no baby announcements waiting for her. She watched her friends on social media post their perfect pictures. Selfies with wedding rings, housewarming parties, and baby kicks. The milestones, the things people took for granted, felt like a distant world she'd never even come close to stepping foot in. She gripped the rag tighter, her knuckles pale as she turned her back on the happy couple. Why hadn't my life moved forward like theirs? She couldn't help it. The thoughts kept coming. Why was she still here in South Korea, working these late shifts, living in a shoebox apartment in a city that felt both too small and too vast at the same time? Why hadn't she moved forward? She'd prayed about it. She had. God, why is it that everyone else gets their happily ever after, and I don't even get to have a chapter? She didn't say the words out loud, but the familiar ache settled in her chest as she mentally sighed. She wasn't angry, just tired. Tired of waiting. Tired of feeling overlooked. And when the quiet loneliness threatened to swallow her whole, she would turn to her old friend, the one she knew she could always rely on, her faith, or at least the remnants of it. But tonight, even that seemed thin, fragile, like a thread stretched too tight. Just as she took another deep breath to calm herself, the door chimed. A familiar face, Ji-ho, the regular customer who seemed to be a fixture at the coffee shop at odd hours. He wasn't much to look at, not in the sense of over-the-top charm, but there was something about him, an almost understated presence that tugged at her curiosity. His dark hair always combed neatly, a navy sweater that looked too expensive for a coffee shop, and his quiet way of ordering. Most people rushed through their orders, eager to get in and out. Not Ji-ho. He would always take his time, looking at the menu as if considering each drink carefully before finally settling on the same thing, a black Americano. She found herself looking forward to the brief moments when he entered, but she never quite understood why. He wasn't particularly talkative, never pried into her life, but somehow he managed to be present without pushing for more. It was subtle, respectful, and yet, when he smiled at her, just a small curve of his lips, it felt like it was the only smile she had seen all day. Tonight, he stepped into the shop quietly, the door chime breaking the silence of the empty room. She didn't immediately look up, but she could feel him, his presence, almost like a ripple in the air around her. His shoes scraped gently against the floor as he walked over to the counter, and Felicia braced herself for the usual. "Americano, please," he would say in his soft, unhurried voice. Instead, Jiho paused just a little longer than usual. His eyes met hers across the counter, and for a split second, Felicia felt her pulse skip. "Felicia," he said, his voice unusually warm. "How's your night been?" She blinked, caught off guard. It wasn't the casual, transactional exchange she had become so used to with her customers. This was personal. She stumbled slightly, not sure how to respond. "It's been fine. You know, the usual." She quickly added a half-hearted smile, trying to keep the conversation light. "How about yours?" "It's been quiet," he answered, his gaze steady but not unkind. "Just wanted to check in on you." His eyes lingered on her for a moment longer, the weight of his words hanging in the air between them. "You seem like you could use a bit of a break." Her heart skipped again. She hadn't expected this, and suddenly she felt self-conscious. Was it that obvious? Could he see what she had been trying to hide all this time? "Thanks," she murmured, trying to brush it off with a shrug. "I'll be fine." Jiho's gaze softened, and he took a seat at the counter much closer than usual, close enough that she could smell his cologne. Something deep, woody, and comforting. Felicia couldn't hide the surprise on her face, her usual routine thrown off. He never did this, never stayed. Jiho set his cup down, his voice lowering as he leaned in slightly. "I'm sorry if I'm making you uncomfortable," he said gently, "but I think you need to know, I'm not just another customer, and you're not just someone behind the counter." The air between them thickened with something unspoken, and Felicia's heartbeat quickened. She wasn't sure if it was the late hour, the exhaustion, or the weight of his words, but her usual cool composure faltered. Her hands, which had been steady on the counter moments before, were now shaking slightly as she reached for a napkin. But Jiho didn't let the silence hang long. His eyes, dark and earnest, were waiting for her to look up, to see him. "Felicia, I've been coming here for a reason. It's not just the coffee," he said quietly, like it was some kind of secret shared between them. "It's you. You're different. And I think maybe it's time you stop waiting for God's plan to make sense and start living the one he's already set in motion." Felicia opened her mouth to speak, but no words came. She was paralyzed by the truth in his voice, the unexpectedness of it all. She wasn't sure whether she felt relief, confusion, or fear. But before she could respond, Jiho stood up, nodding as if he'd said what he needed to say. "You're not alone, Felicia. Not tonight." And with that, he walked out of the coffee shop, leaving her standing there in the dim light of the closing hours, the taste of his words lingering in the air. For the first time in what felt like forever, Felicia allowed herself to wonder. Maybe things were about to change after all. The sound of the door chime fading behind him, Felicia stood frozen in the stillness. Could it really be that simple? Could someone see her, truly see her, the way Jiho had just done, the way she had wanted, needed, for so long? Her phone buzzed once, but she didn't look at it. She didn't need to. Not anymore. Maybe tonight she wasn't as alone as she thought. The days after Jiho's unexpected words in the coffee shop lingered in Felicia's mind like an echo she couldn't shake. Every time she walked into the shop, there he was, like a quiet, constant presence, neither too forward nor too distant, but always there. His small, thoughtful gesture started to feel like an invisible thread pulling her in, and she couldn't help but notice how much more alive she felt in his presence. Ji-ho was unlike any man she had known. He had a way of making her feel seen, like she mattered, not just as the manager of a coffee shop or another face in the crowd of South Korea, but as Felicia Morgan, the woman who had lived 1,000 little moments of heartache, who had seen dreams slip through her fingers more times than she could count. He didn't rush her or push her to open up, but there was a certain stillness in his gaze, as if he were waiting for her to take the next step, to trust him with the unspoken parts of herself. Felicia found herself craving the comfort of his silence. It was as if his very presence was a quiet reassurance, a promise that she didn't have to explain herself, didn't have to hide the messy, broken parts of her heart. She had spent years locking those parts away, afraid that if anyone saw the cracks, they'd leave. But with Ji-ho, she felt different. There was no pressure to be perfect. There was only a deep, unspoken understanding that, for some reason, he saw her, and that was more than she'd ever had before. It unsettled her in ways she didn't want to admit. The first time Felicia spoke openly about her past, it was a slow and careful unraveling. It happened one afternoon when the shop was quiet, the midday rush long past. She was wiping down the counter, her thoughts elsewhere, when Ji-ho sat across from her at the counter, his usual Americano in hand. He always seemed to know when she needed space and when she needed company. Today, he chose to sit in silence beside her, letting the comfortable quiet fill the space between them. She glanced up at him, catching the way he was watching her, his gaze soft but unwavering. "Do you ever think about the past?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. She wasn't sure why she had asked. Maybe it was the warmth of the coffee they were sharing, or the calmness that always seemed to follow him around. Whatever it was, it made her feel like the words wouldn't be judged, like she could say them and not feel the weight of their truth. Ji-ho tilted his head slightly, his eyes narrowing with gentle curiosity. "I think about it sometimes," he said quietly, "but mostly, I try not to get stuck there. It's hard to move forward if you keep looking back." Felicia smiled, but it was tinged with sadness. "I wish I could do that," she admitted, her fingers tracing the rim of her mug absent-mindedly. "But I'm not sure how to leave it behind. I keep thinking about the things I've lost, the relationships that never worked out, the choices I didn't make. It feels like I'm always waiting, but never really getting anywhere." Ji-ho's gaze softened, and for a moment, Felicia felt as if he could see right through her, as if he understood what it meant to wait without ever feeling like you were moving forward. "You're not the only one who feels that way," he said, and his voice held a quiet weight. "I gave up my own dreams once. I thought I had to choose between the life I wanted and the one I thought I should have." He paused, the words heavy in the air between them. "I chose the corporate life, the family I thought I owed something to, but in doing so, I gave up everything I ever wanted. I gave up the chance at a life I could have loved." Felicia looked at him, her heart aching for him in a way she hadn't expected. "What do you mean?" she asked softly. "I wanted a family," Ji-ho continued, his voice quiet but resolute. "I wanted to find someone who could make all the hours spent in the office worth it. But when I finally realized I was just a cog in a machine, it was too late. My dreams of love, of a home, slipped away, one decision at a time. Now, I'm just here." Felicia could see the weariness in his eyes, the quiet regret that lived in the spaces between his words. And in that moment, she felt something shift inside her. Something she hadn't been able to put into words. They were both searching for something that could fill the gaps in their lives, something that could make all the pain and the waiting feel worthwhile. That night, Felicia attended a wedding with a group of friends from her church. The grand venue was lit with chandeliers, the scent of roses filling the air as laughter echoed against the high ceilings. It was a celebration, a joyous occasion. And yet, all Felicia could feel was the crushing weight of her own inadequacies. She watched the bride and groom share their vows, their eyes locked in a moment that seemed so effortlessly perfect. Everyone around her was so sure of where they were in life. She, on the other hand, felt like an outsider, like she had somehow missed her chance at this kind of happiness. Her friends chatted and laughed, their eyes filled with excitement for the couple's future, but Felicia could barely join in. She smiled and nodded, but the words felt hollow in her mouth. She wasn't where they were. She wasn't anywhere near there. Later that night, when the party had dwindled, she found herself alone on the rooftop, staring out over the city skyline. The cold air nipped at her skin, but it felt good. The chill grounded her in the silence. She pulled her jacket tighter around her shoulders, her phone lying abandoned at her side. Her thoughts spiraled. Why hasn't it been me? The question pinged in her mind like a broken record. Why hadn't she been the one standing there in a white dress, surrounded by people who loved her? Why wasn't her phone lighting up with a text from a man who truly cared about her? Her phone buzzed, but she didn't look at it. She didn't need to. The truth was, no matter how many times she'd prayed, no matter how many quiet moments she had spent asking God for a sign, she was still waiting for something to make her feel seen. And then, out of nowhere, Jiho appeared, as quietly as always, standing beside her without a word. He wasn't loud, wasn't imposing. He was just there. He didn't ask questions, didn't demand anything. He simply leaned against the railing, his presence filling the space beside her. Felicia didn't say anything at first. She didn't know what to say, but his presence was all the comfort she needed. She wasn't alone. Not anymore. They stood in silence for a while, the only sounds the distant hum of the city and the soft rustle of the wind. It felt like time had slowed down, like everything else had faded away. There was only the two of them, standing side by side, the weight of unspoken words hanging between them. Jiho turned slightly, his hand reaching into his pocket. He pulled out a small, leather-bound journal, its edges worn from use. He handed it to her without a word, just a quiet smile that spoke volumes. "Start writing," he said softly. "Everything that's happening, everything you're thinking. One day, it will make sense." Felicia stared at the journal in her hands. The simple act of giving her something so personal, so sacred, felt like a turning point. It wasn't just a journal. It was a gift. A promise that she didn't have to carry everything alone. She didn't know what to say. Her heart swelled with something she couldn't name, but she nodded, a quiet acknowledgement passing between them. She would write. She would start the journey, piece by piece. And maybe, just maybe one day, it would all make sense. As she held the journal in her hands, the cold night air wrapping around her, Felicia felt a shift inside. Maybe this was the beginning. Maybe God's plan hadn't skipped her after all. Maybe it had been waiting for her to start writing the next chapter. Felicia had always been good at building walls. She was a master at it, in fact. Not that she was proud of it. The walls had started out as tiny cracks, small pieces of hurt that she didn't know how to handle. And over the years, they'd grown taller, thicker, more impenetrable. She used them to keep people at a distance, to shield herself from the vulnerability that came with opening up. Because opening up meant risking heartache, rejection, and worse, the crushing realization that no one would truly care enough to stay. And then Jiho came along, quiet, patient, and unlike anyone she had ever known. His presence was gentle, like a breath of fresh air, steady and comforting. But with every conversation, every shared glance, the walls inside her began to tremble. His quiet smile, the way he listened without judgment, the way he seemed to see through the mask she wore, he was chipping away at the foundation she had spent years so carefully building. Felicia didn't want to let him in. She couldn't. The coffee shop had become their unspoken meeting place. He would come in every few days, always at the same hour, with the same order, a black Americano, a soft smile that made her heart flutter without meaning to. But lately, things had shifted. The smiles had become longer, the silences deeper, and the way he looked at her when their eyes met. That look made her feel as though he could see right through her carefully constructed exterior. Every time they spoke, Felicia felt the pull to lean in, to let him get closer, to feel what she'd been afraid to feel for so long. But fear held her back. Fear of repeating old mistakes, of letting her heart wander into territory she wasn't sure she could navigate. So, she buried her feelings, deep inside, where they wouldn't cause any more damage. It was easier that way, wasn't it? At least that's what she kept telling herself. One evening, as the shop began to empty, Jiho lingered by the counter, his eyes a little more serious than usual. Felicia wiped down the counter slowly, pretending not to notice his gaze. She'd learned to keep her emotions in check, especially with him. She wasn't ready for this. Whatever this was, whatever connection she was feeling, whatever attraction was pulling her towards him, she wasn't ready. "You've been quiet tonight," Jiho said, his voice gentle, almost like an invitation for her to open up. Felicia forced a smile. "Long day," she replied, keeping her tone light, trying to play off the weight of her thoughts. But she could feel the tension in the air, thick like a storm cloud. He wasn't buying it. She could see it in the way his brow furrowed, the way his lips pressed together like he wanted to say something, but wasn't sure if she was ready to hear it. "You don't have to pretend with me," Jiho said, his voice low and honest. "I see you, Felicia, and I'm not going anywhere." Her heart skipped a beat. He saw her, and that terrified her. It terrified her because it meant that all her carefully hidden insecurities, all the broken parts she'd tucked away, were no longer safe. He could see them. He could see her. And in that moment, she realized she didn't know how to handle that. "I'm not ready for this," she said quietly, more to herself than to him. "You don't have to be," Jiho said, taking a step closer. "I'm not asking for anything. I just want to be here. For you. When you're ready." The words hit her harder than she expected. There was no pressure, no expectation, just his presence, offering her the one thing she had never felt comfortable asking for: patience. Later that week, Jiho invited her to a traditional Korean tea house, a quiet, intimate place with flickering candles and the soft sound of bamboo wind chimes. It was a stark contrast to the busy, fast-paced world she had been living in. The moment they walked inside, Felicia felt the weight of the outside world slip away. The atmosphere was peaceful, almost serene. And for the first time in what felt like forever, she felt the tightness in her chest loosen. They sat at a low table, sharing tea in delicate porcelain cups. The quiet murmurs of other patrons filled the background, but it felt as though time slowed down for just the two of them. Jiho poured the tea slowly, his hands steady, careful, like he was savoring the moment. They didn't speak for a while, just enjoying the warmth of the tea and the silence that hung between them. But it wasn't awkward. It was comfortable. "You know," Jiho said after a while, his voice soft, "I used to dream of owning a little tea house like this, a place where I could get away from everything, a quiet corner where life could feel peaceful." Felicia looked at him, surprised. "You? A tea house?" She laughed softly. "I thought you were all about business and corporate deals." Jiho smiled, but it was tinged with sadness. "I gave that up. Too many expectations from my family. I thought I could find peace in the things I thought I should want. But now I'm just running in circles, trying to keep up with a life I didn't choose." Felicia felt a pang of understanding. "I get that," she said quietly, her eyes meeting his. "I've spent so much time working on myself, trying to be something I'm not, that I don't even know who I am anymore. I thought if I kept going, kept pushing, maybe I'd eventually catch up to the life I was supposed to have. But I'm starting to wonder if I've been running in the wrong direction all along." Their eyes locked, and in that moment, Felicia felt the distance between them close. She didn't know when it happened, when the walls had started to crumble, when the trust had begun to build, but she knew something had changed. Something had shifted inside her, something that made her want to take a risk. The evening ended too soon, and as they stepped outside into the cool night air, the city lights glowed faintly in the distance. Jiho walked beside her, his presence warm, comforting. They didn't speak as they made their way down the street, but the air between them felt charged with something unspoken, something deeper than either of them had acknowledged before. When they reached her apartment building, Jiho stopped, turning to face her. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then, slowly, he reached out, placing his hand gently on her arm, the warmth of his touch sending a jolt of electricity through her body. "I'm not asking for more," Jiho said softly, "but I'm here, Felicia. I'm always here, whenever you're ready." Felicia swallowed hard, the weight of his words pressing on her chest. She wanted to say something, but her mind felt foggy, clouded by the swirl of emotions she wasn't ready to confront. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came. All she could do was nod, the silence between them heavy with everything that hadn't been said. As Jiho walked away, Felicia stood there, her hand resting where his had been on her arm, the warmth lingering in the cold night air. That night, after she collapsed onto her couch, Felicia could no longer hold back the flood of emotion she had been fighting for so long. She was overwhelmed by everything. Her feelings for Jiho, the fear that she wasn't good enough, the uncertainty about her future. Her breath caught in her throat as the tears began to fall. She hadn't let herself cry in years, but tonight, the walls that had held everything back finally gave way. She sobbed into the pillow, feeling the weight of everything she had tried to ignore. Was she ready? Could she really let him in? Could she risk the one thing she'd been protecting for so long? Her heart? Her mind swirled with questions she didn't have answers for, and she sank deeper into the quiet chaos of her thoughts. But one thing was clear. The walls were coming down, and with each passing moment, she felt a little more vulnerable, a little more open, and a little more afraid. As Felicia cried herself to sleep, the journal Jiho had given her lay open on the table, its pages still blank. She didn't know what to write yet, but she knew that tomorrow would come, and with it, the chance to begin something, whether she was ready or not. Felicia had never felt this exhausted before. She had always prided herself on being strong, capable of handling whatever life threw at her. But now she could barely drag herself out of bed in the mornings. The weight of her emotions was too much, too heavy. Her job at the coffee shop was draining her, and every night she would return to her small apartment, only to feel more and more isolated. The steady hum of the city outside her window was a constant reminder of how alone she truly felt. The stress of her day-to-day life, facing rude customers, dealing with the endless grind of shifts, barely keeping up with her finances, had begun to chip away at her. But it wasn't just the job that was weighing her down. It was Jiho, or rather, it was the way her feelings for him were growing, rapidly and uncontrollably. She couldn't fight it anymore. Every time he walked into the shop, every glance he shared with her, every word exchanged between them, it all felt like a slow pull, a magnet drawing her in closer. She could no longer deny the attraction she felt for him. But her mind was a battlefield, warring against the growing warmth in her chest. She wasn't ready for this. She wasn't ready to let anyone in. Not again. The last time she had done that, she had gotten hurt in ways she couldn't even begin to explain. And yet, despite all her fears, she knew that Jiho was different. He wasn't asking for anything. He wasn't rushing her. He just was, and that was enough. It was another long night at the coffee shop, and as usual, Felicia found herself alone after the last customers had left. She stood behind the counter, wiping down the surfaces that no longer seemed to matter. The fluorescent lights above flickered softly as the silence of the shop swallowed her whole. She should have been grateful. She should have felt accomplished. She had made it through another day, but there was no satisfaction in it anymore. No sense of purpose beyond the endless cycle of wake up, work, sleep. The phone in her pocket buzzed, its shrill sound cutting through the quiet. Felicia. It was Jiho's voice. She hadn't expected to hear from him tonight, but somehow she wasn't surprised either. There was a part of her that had grown used to his calls, used to hearing his voice in the stillness of her evenings. "I'm outside," he said softly. She blinked in surprise. "Outside?" "I brought you something," he replied, his voice tinged with a small smile. Felicia glanced at the clock. It was late, and she had no reason to be surprised that Jiho was showing up after hours, offering whatever small comfort he thought would make her day easier. He had done it before. She stepped outside, the cool night air hitting her skin like a sudden shock, and there he stood, leaning against the brick wall of the building. He was holding a bag in his hand, the soft glow of the streetlights reflecting off his dark hair. "I thought you might be hungry," Jiho said, his eyes soft but unreadable. Felicia raised an eyebrow. "Hungry? At this hour?" He smiled, a small, knowing curve of his lips. "Well, I was thinking you might be. You never eat enough." She laughed softly, a breath of air escaping her lungs that felt almost too heavy to carry. "You're always looking out for me, Jiho. Why?" His smile faded, and he took a step forward, closing the distance between them. "Because you're worth looking out for," he said simply. She felt the weight of his words settle deep inside her chest, and for the first time in what felt like forever, the walls inside her trembled, shaking loose some of the defenses she'd spent years building. She didn't know what to say. She didn't even know what to feel anymore. But the vulnerability in his eyes, his honesty, the depth of his care, was too much to ignore. "I'm sorry," Felicia said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I know I've been pushing you away. I've been pushing everything away. I'm scared, Jiho. I'm scared of what happens when I let myself feel anything." She could see the way his eyes softened as he took another step closer, his hand gently brushing against hers. "You don't have to be scared with me," he said, his voice steady but full of unspoken understanding. "I'm not going anywhere." Felicia's heart skipped a beat. The flood of emotions that had been building inside her for weeks finally broke free, and before she knew what was happening, she was stepping into his embrace. "I'm sorry," she repeated, her voice breaking slightly. "I'm not ready for this. For us. But I'm trying. I'm trying to be ready." Jiho's arms tightened around her, and for the first time in a long time, Felicia allowed herself to feel the warmth of someone else's presence. He didn't need her to say anything more. His silence, his presence. This was enough. Later, Jiho invited her to a quiet spot they'd both enjoyed in one of their earlier walks. It was a small, private park in the heart of the city where the city lights shimmered against the dark water of a nearby pond. The air was still, the night calm and full of potential. They sat on a bench, side by side, in the growing darkness. Jiho had been quiet for a long while, and Felicia felt the weight of the moment settle over her. She could feel the tension between them, something new growing, something undefined but full of promise. She turned to him. "Tell me what you're afraid of, Jiho," she asked softly. "I know it's not just me." He exhaled slowly, his fingers tapping against the cool metal of the bench. He was silent for a long moment, as if searching for the right words. "I'm afraid of not being enough," he finally said, his voice low, vulnerable. "I've spent so long building walls of my own, hiding behind my work, pretending that I didn't want more. But I do. I want more than this empty life I've built for myself. And I'm afraid that even if I let you in, I'll still fall short, that I won't be enough for you." The words hit Felicia like a wave, pulling her under. She had never heard him speak so openly, so raw, and it made her heart ache in a way she hadn't expected. He wasn't just a man who had been quietly patient with her. He was a man who had been hiding his own fears, his own wounds, just as she had. "I don't need you to be perfect, Jiho," she whispered, her fingers brushing against his. "I just need you to be here, with me." The chemistry between them was undeniable. As he reached out, his hand gently cupping her cheek, Felicia felt her heart race. They leaned in slowly, as if the world had come to a standstill. The kiss was soft at first, tentative, as though they were both testing the waters of something new, something fragile. But it deepened, and in that moment, everything that had been building between them, the tension, the unspoken connection, exploded. It was tender and powerful at once, a promise of things to come, of a future neither of them could fully understand, but both were willing to step into. As they pulled away, the sound of Felicia's phone vibrating against her pocket shattered the quiet. She reluctantly pulled it out, her fingers trembling as she looked at the screen. It was an email, a job offer, an opportunity she had been waiting for. The offer to move back to the U.S., to take her career to the next level, to step into a future she had dreamed about for years. Her heart sank. The timing couldn't have been worse. "Jiho," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, her fingers gripping the phone tighter than she realized. I have to go. I've been offered the job I've always wanted, the one I've been praying for." Jiho's expression softened, his eyes searching hers. "Do you want to go?" he asked quietly. Felicia didn't know how to answer. The world seemed to collapse around her as the weight of the decision pressed down on her shoulders. She was standing at the crossroads of everything she had ever wanted, and everything she had ever feared. Would she stay with Jiho and risk the love that had begun to bloom between them? Or would she leave, chasing a dream she had spent years building, but at the cost of the man who had quietly healed her heart? The choice was hers, and she didn't know if she was ready to make it. Felicia stood at the window of her apartment, staring out at the familiar skyline of Seoul. The city felt both distant and intimate, a constant hum of life that mirrored the confusion in her chest. Her hands were cold, but her mind was burning with indecision. The offer, the dream job, lay on the table in front of her, the weight of it pressing down on her like 1,000 pounds. She had spent so many years chasing this, working tirelessly toward this moment, and now that it was here, she couldn't bring herself to reach for it. The job had been her plan for the future, the life she had been told to build, the career that had always been her only focus. But now, after everything that had happened with Jiho, after all the feelings she had suppressed and the walls she had built, she was torn. Do I stay in Seoul with him? Or do I go back to the life I've always known? The question swirled in her mind, but it felt like no matter what answer she reached, it would be wrong. If she stayed, she would be following her heart. But if she left, she would be abandoning a dream that had always been hers. Her phone buzzed, but she ignored it. She couldn't deal with anything else right now. Not the constant reminders of what she should be doing with her life. Not the people back home who would be waiting for her to return, to take the position they all thought she deserved. Shouldn't I be further along by now? She thought bitterly. I should have it all figured out. Why does it feel like I'm still just waiting? The self-doubt crept in, the guilt. She had told herself she was ready, ready for a fresh start, ready to build a life that was her own. But in the quiet moments, when she allowed herself to truly feel, she realized just how much she had been running from the very thing she wanted most. She wasn't just running from love. She was running from faith. Faith in herself, in God's timing, in what she was meant to have. She packed a small bag, not enough for the long stay she planned, but just enough for a few days away. She needed to go home. She needed to clear her mind, to step outside of the world she had built around herself and just breathe. She stood at the door, her bag slung over her shoulder, and glanced back at her apartment, the small space that had been both her sanctuary and her prison. But something had changed. The air felt lighter now, less oppressive. Before she closed the door behind her, she noticed the journal Jiho had given her, resting on the table. She had meant to open it days ago, but life had swept her away. She picked it up, feeling the soft leather beneath her fingers. The words he had written to her still echoed in her mind. Start writing. Everything that's happening, every thought you have. One day, it will make sense. She didn't know why, but she felt compelled to open it now, before she left. She flipped through the pages, reading her own words, her prayers, her doubts, her dreams. There were moments in the journal where she had written about her fears of being stuck, of never moving forward, of never being enough. She had poured out her heart onto those pages, as though hoping that somehow the words would give her clarity. She came to a passage she had written after the kiss with Jiho. Maybe I've been running for so long because I'm afraid to love, afraid to let anyone in. But I don't think I'm ready to be alone anymore. I'm scared of what might happen if I stop running. But I also know that if I don't take a chance, I'll regret it. She closed the journal, her fingers lingering on the leather. I arrived ready. She read the words again, and this time they didn't feel like a statement of doubt. They felt like a revelation, a quiet whisper from God, telling her that she hadn't missed her moment. She had arrived right where she was supposed to be, exactly when she was meant to be there. She let out a breath, as though some invisible weight had lifted off her shoulders. She had been so focused on the things she thought she wanted that she hadn't noticed the things God had placed in front of her, the love she had been running from, the relationship she had been too scared to embrace. She wasn't behind. She wasn't lost. She was simply on the path she was meant to take. She made a decision then. She was going to take a leap of faith, not into her career, but into something that had been growing between her and Jiho all along. She was going to let herself love, let herself feel, and most importantly, let herself believe that this was God's timing. So she went for a walk to clear her mind. It was nearly midnight when she returned to her apartment, her heart light and her mind made up. But as she unlocked the door, she froze. There, on the steps of her building, stood Jiho. He was waiting for her. She hadn't expected him to be there. Not tonight. She had planned to leave quietly, to sort everything out on her own. But here he was, his presence both a comfort and a challenge. He was the last thing she expected, but exactly what she needed. Jiho, she whispered, a mixture of relief and surprise flooding her chest. He stood up, walking toward her, his expression serious but soft. He didn't need to say anything at first. He just held out his hand, his eyes never leaving hers. I didn't want you to leave without telling you, he said, his voice quiet but full of conviction. Felicia, I'm in love with you, and I'm not asking for anything in return. But I believe in us. I believe in you. And I think we're meant to be together. Felicia felt her heart flip in her chest. She had been so afraid to hear those words, so afraid to open herself up, to let someone see her, really see her, the way Jiho did. But now, standing there in front of him, with his love laid bare, something inside her shifted. "I'm ready too," she whispered, her voice trembling with the weight of everything she had been holding back. The fear, the doubt, the walls, all of it came crashing down in that single moment. She stepped forward and, without hesitation, kissed him. It was slow and tender, the kind of kiss that spoke of all the things they had yet to say. It wasn't about rushing toward anything. It was about finally, after all this time, allowing themselves to feel what had been growing between them. "I'm ready, Jiho. I'm ready to face this with you, whatever comes." She spent 7 days in the U.S. and returned to Seoul. The flight back to South Korea was a quiet one. Felicia stared out the window, the endless stretch of ocean below, a dark, tranquil expanse that mirrored her thoughts. The decision had been made. She had chosen Jiho. She had chosen love, and in doing so, she had chosen herself. She hadn't expected it to be easy. The pull of her dream job in the U.S. was strong, the weight of expectations from her family and friends pressing down on her. But when it came down to it, she couldn't leave. She couldn't turn her back on the love that had come into her life so unexpectedly. She couldn't walk away from Jiho, from the man who had patiently seen her through her fears, who had quietly built a foundation beneath her, one brick at a time. She had always been a planner, a woman who had built her life around structure and control. But here she was, standing on the precipice of something entirely new, something she couldn't predict or plan for. And it was terrifying, but it was also exhilarating. She closed her eyes, taking a slow, deep breath. "I'm ready," she thought. "I'm ready for everything." When she stepped off the plane in Seoul, the familiar air, the buzz of the city, felt different. There was a lightness in her chest, a sense of clarity she hadn't felt in years. Jiho was waiting for her at the gate, his familiar smile greeting her like a beacon in the sea of faces. It had only been a few days since she left, but it felt like a lifetime. He was holding a bouquet of white roses, the petals soft against the backdrop of his dark coat. As she walked toward him, the world seemed to quiet down, the noise of the airport fading into the background. The only thing that mattered was him, standing there with open arms, his eyes filled with warmth and love. "I'm so glad you're back," Jiho said, his voice thick with emotion as he handed her the flowers. He stepped closer, taking her hand gently in his. "You made the right choice." Felicia smiled, her heart full as she looked into his eyes. "I know. I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." They stood there for a moment, just breathing in the quiet between them. In that simple moment, the noise of the world, the pressure of the past few days, fell away. It was just the two of them, ready to build a future together. The days that followed were a whirlwind. Felicia found herself immersed in the life she had been too afraid to embrace, the life she had always dreamed of, but never dared to take seriously. With Jiho by her side, she felt like she could finally breathe. There was no more running, no more hiding from her heart. She was learning to trust, not just in Jiho, but in herself, in the timing of her life. They spent long afternoons at the park, walking hand in hand, sharing quiet moments under the cherry blossoms that were just beginning to bloom. She had never felt more at peace with herself. There were no more doubts, no more second guessing. For the first time in years, Felicia felt grounded. She felt seen, not just by Jiho, but by the world, by herself. And Jiho? He was everything she needed, and everything she didn't know she had been waiting for. Every day with him felt like a gift, and every touch, every kiss was a reminder that love wasn't something she had to chase or fight for. It was something she had to choose, and she had chosen him. One afternoon, Jiho took Felicia to a quiet spot just outside of Seoul, a small, secluded park that was hidden from the hustle and bustle of the city. The ground was soft beneath their feet, and the air was filled with the scent of the blooming cherry blossoms. It was a place they had visited together before, but today it felt different. Jiho had been unusually quiet on their walk, and Felicia could feel the tension in the air between them. She glanced up at him, curiosity swirling in her chest. "You've been thinking a lot lately," she said, her voice light but knowing. Jiho smiled, his eyes soft. "I have. There's something I've been meaning to say." Felicia's heart raced a little faster, uncertainty creeping in. What's he thinking? They reached the center of the park, where a large cherry blossom tree stood, its branches heavy with pink blooms, the petals falling like confetti in the breeze. Jiho stopped in front of the tree and turned to face her, his eyes steady but full of emotion. "Felicia," he began, his voice low and serious, "I've spent my entire life following a path that was laid out for me, a life I thought I had to live. But since meeting you, I've realized something. I've been chasing the wrong things, and now I'm ready to chase what really matters." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small velvet box, his hands trembling ever so slightly as he opened it to reveal a delicate silver ring with a single diamond in the center. Felicia's breath caught in her throat as she looked at the ring. She hadn't expected this. Not here, not now. "Felicia Morgan," Jiho said, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes. "I don't know what the future holds, but I know that I want to spend it with you. Will you marry me?" The world seemed to stop for a moment. Everything fell away. The noise, the uncertainty, the worries. And all that was left was the weight of his words, the tenderness of his gesture. Felicia felt the tears come before she could even stop them. She didn't know how to explain what she was feeling. It was more than just love. It was relief. It was trust. It was the peace she had been searching for her entire life. "Yes," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Yes, Jiho, I'll marry you." They stood there, under the cherry blossoms, wrapped in each other's arms, as the petals fell softly around them. It felt like the beginning of something new, a new chapter, a new life they would write together. There was no more running, no more fear. They were ready to face whatever came after forever. As they walked hand in hand back through the park, their hearts full and their future bright, Felicia couldn't help but smile. The journey had been long, full of twists and turns, but it had led her here, to Jiho, to this moment, and for the first time in her life, she was certain. She was exactly where she was meant to be. Together, they would face everything that life had in store, knowing that with each step they took, their love would be the foundation beneath them. The end. You didn't arrive late, you arrived ready. If this episode gave you a little hope, tap heart and share it with someone who needs the reminder. Before you go, I want to hear from you. What late have you been carrying that you're ready to release? Comment, "I'm ready," if that's you. And if you love ambw dramas with faith, romance, and real heart, subscribe and turn on the bell for more stories that feel like a soft place to land. Thank you so much for your support.